The village, nestled in the shadow of the hills, was the kind of place where time seemed to stand still. Cobblestone streets wound between weathered cottages, their roofs sagging under years of thatch and moss. A chill hung in the air, clinging to the folds of the villagers' heavy cloaks as they shuffled toward the chapel. It was a gray morning, the kind that dimmed the sun into little more than a pale smudge behind thick clouds. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and wood smoke, but beneath it lingered something intangible, a weight, a tension that seemed to stifle even the birdsong. Lena's death had struck the village like a thunderclap. At just 16, she had been a burst of color in their muted world, her laughter ringing like wind chimes through the forest paths where she spent most of her days. She was a girl who preferred the company of animals to people, her closest companion being Solace, a sleek black mare with eyes so deep and knowing that the villagers whispered of fairy blood in her veins. They had been inseparable. The sight of Lena galloping across the meadows, her auburn hair a fiery banner against the sky, was one of the few things that brought life to the village's dreary routine. But all of that was gone now. The news of Lena's death had spread quickly, carried on the lips of the baker, the blacksmith, and the seamstress, each recounting it with a tremor that betrayed their own disbelief. They said she had fallen from Solace's back near the old oak tree at the forest edge, a place steeped in legend and unease. Some claimed it was an accident. Others murmured of darker forces at play. But no one could deny the tragedy of it. Her parents, hollow-eyed and stooped with grief, had insisted on a proper funeral, though many wondered how they could bear the sight of her lifeless form. The chapel stood at the heart of the village, its stone walls streaked with lichen and its bell tower leaning slightly to one side. Inside, the air was thick with the mingled scents of beeswax candles and crushed lavender, meant to mask the sharp tang of death. Lena's coffin lay at the front, draped in white linen and surrounded by wildflowers plucked from the meadow she loved so much. Villagers filled the pews, their faces etched with sorrow and something else, an unease they couldn't quite name. Solace had been restless since Lena's death. The mare refused food, her ears constantly swiveling, as if searching for a voice no one else could hear. Some said she had seen what happened that day by the oak tree, that her erratic behavior was a sign she carried a burden too great for any beast. Others dismissed it as nonsense, attributing it to grief or an animal's natural instincts. Yet, even those skeptics couldn't deny the way Solace's mournful whinnies pierced the night, sending chills up the spines of those who lived close enough to hear. As the villagers filed into the chapel, Solace was tethered outside, her hooves pawing the ground with growing agitation. The priest, a gaunt man with a voice as dry as parchment, began the service with a solemn prayer, his words echoing through the high, vaulted ceiling. Lena's parents sat in the front pew, her mother clutching a handkerchief to her face while her father stared straight ahead, his jaw tight. The air was heavy with unshed tears and the weight of what might have been. Those who knew Lena best couldn't help but let their thoughts drift as the priest's voice droned on. They remembered the way she would sing to Solace in the stable, her voice soft and lilting, or the way she'd disappear into the woods for hours, only to return with her cheeks flushed and her arms full of wildflowers. They thought of the stories she told, the ones about the old oak tree, how she believed it was a gateway to something beyond their understanding. She had been drawn to that tree, as though it held secrets meant only for her. Outside, Solace's movements grew more frantic. The mare tugged at her tether, her dark eyes rolling with a mix of fear and determination. A low murmur rippled through the congregation as they heard the commotion, but no one dared move. The priest's voice faltered for a moment before he pressed on, urging the villagers to focus on Lena's eternal rest. But the noise outside grew louder, a sharp, panicked neigh followed by the unmistakable sound of hooves on stone. Then, before anyone could react, the chapel doors burst open. Solace stood in the entryway, her sleek coat glistening with sweat, her sides heaving as though she had galloped straight from the edge of the world. Gasps filled the room as the mare strode forward, her hooves clattering against the stone floor. Some villagers scrambled to their feet, clutching their rosaries, while others sat frozen, their eyes wide with shock. Solace moved with purpose, her head low, her movements deliberate. She reached the coffin and paused, her breath steaming in the cool air of the chapel. The room was silent, save for the sound of her breathing and the faint creak of the coffin's wooden frame. The priest's voice died in his throat as Solace reared slightly, her front hooves landing on the coffin's lid. The act was at once gentle and commanding, as though the mare were claiming her place in Lena's farewell. No one spoke. No one moved. The villagers watched, their hearts pounding in their chests, as Solace lowered her head to the coffin, her muzzle brushing against the linen shroud. It was as if she were trying to wake Lena, to will her back to life with the same bond that had connected them in life. For a moment, it seemed the mare's efforts might succeed. The air grew thick, heavy with an energy no one could name, and a faint, unearthly light seemed to shimmer around the pair. And then it was gone. The light faded and Solace let out a soft, mournful whinny that echoed through the chapel like a lament. The villagers sat in stunned silence, their breath caught in their throats. Some clutched each other's hands, while others crossed themselves, whispering prayers under their breath. Solace stepped down from the coffin, her movements slow and deliberate, as though she understood the weight of what she had done. The priest finally found his voice, though it trembled as he spoke. "Perhaps," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "this is not the end of Lena's story." Outside, the clouds began to break, a faint shaft of sunlight piercing through the gloom to illuminate the chapel's stained glass windows. Inside, no one moved, their eyes fixed on the mare who stood silent and still beside the coffin, as if waiting for something only she could see. The funeral service had begun with the solemn tolling of the chapel bell, its deep, resonant chime cutting through the somber silence of the village. Inside, the gathered crowd murmured prayers under their breath, their hands clasped tightly as they glanced toward the coffin draped in white linen. The priest stood at the altar, his voice steady but heavy with the weight of the moment. He spoke of life's fleeting nature, of Lena's vibrant spirit, and the hole her passing had left in their lives. Yet, despite his words of comfort, the atmosphere remained taut with tension, like a storm waiting to break. The villagers filled the pews, their faces etched with grief, but their eyes carried more than sorrow. There was a flicker of unease among them, a collective whisper of something unresolved. Many had known Lena since birth, had watched her grow into a spirited young woman with a knack for wandering into places others avoided. Her fascination with the old oak tree was no secret, nor were the strange stories she sometimes told about the things she saw and felt there. Some chalked it up to the imagination of a dreamy girl, but others whispered about her uncanny bond with Solace, a connection that seemed almost otherworldly. The mare, tethered outside the chapel, had been agitated all morning. Her restless movements and sharp whinnies pierced through the quiet, drawing worried glances from those closest to the door. Solace had always been a calm horse, unshakable even in the face of thunder or crowds. But today, her behavior bordered on wild. Her ears twitched in every direction, and her hooves struck the ground with sharp, deliberate stomps as though she were protesting the very event taking place inside. The priest's voice continued, a steady cadence against the backdrop of muffled sobs and Solace's growing agitation. He spoke of Lena's kindness, her love for the world around her, and the deep bond she shared with the mare. She was a child of nature, he said, his voice thick with emotion. She saw beauty where others saw only the mundane. She understood the language of the earth and the creatures who walk upon it. We must believe that she now rests in the arms of the divine. But as his words hung in the air, a sharp, piercing neigh from outside interrupted the somber stillness. Heads turned toward the doors, the sound slicing through the chapel like a blade. The priest faltered for a moment, his hands gripping the sides of the pulpit as he tried to regain the congregation's attention. Yet another neigh followed, this one louder and more insistent, accompanied by the sound of hooves scraping against stone. A murmur spread through the crowd. Some glanced at each other, their eyes wide with unease, while others crossed themselves, muttering prayers under their breath. The priest raised a hand, urging calm, but even he could not hide the flicker of apprehension in his expression. Outside, the commotion grew louder. Solace was tugging at her tether, her powerful muscles straining against the rope as she pawed the ground with increasing fervor. "Should we?" One villager began, his voice barely above a whisper, but before he could finish, a sudden, resounding crack echoed through the air. The chapel doors burst open, swinging wide with a force that startled even the bravest among them. Solace stood framed in the doorway, her dark coat glistening with sweat, her chest heaving as though she had run for miles. The tether, now dangling from her neck, was frayed and broken. Gasps rippled through the congregation as Solace stepped forward, her hooves clattering against the stone floor. Some villagers leapt to their feet, clutching at each other in alarm, while others sat frozen, their hands trembling in their laps. The priest's voice faltered again, his words lost in the collective shock that swept through the room. No one dared move as the mayor strode purposely down the center aisle, her head held high, her eyes fixed on the coffin at the front of the chapel. The mayor's presence was commanding, almost regal, and the villagers could not help but watch in awe and terror as she approached the altar. Her movements were deliberate, each step echoing in the silence that had fallen over the room. The priest raised a hand as if to stop her, but something in her gaze, an intensity that seemed almost human, made him hesitate. Solace paused at the coffin, her breathing heavy, her sides quivering with exertion. For a moment, it seemed as though time itself had stopped. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, Solace reared slightly, her front hooves landing gently on the coffin's lid. The action drew audible gasps from the crowd, some villagers pressing their hands to their mouths in disbelief. The priest took a step back, his face pale, as he clutched the rosary that hung from his neck. Solace stood there, towering over the coffin, her head lowered as though in mourning. Her dark mane fell like a veil across her face, her nostrils flaring as she nudged the linen shroud with her muzzle. The room was thick with silence, broken only by the sound of Solace's breath and the faint creak of the coffin's wooden frame. The villagers watched, their hearts pounding in their chests as the mayor seemed to commune with the lifeless form within. Some whispered prayers, while others stared in wide-eyed disbelief, their hands trembling at their sides. Even the priest, who had spent his life speaking of faith and miracles, was struck dumb by the scene before him. As Solace stood over the coffin, a faint, unearthly light began to fill the room. It was subtle at first, a soft glow that seemed to emanate from nowhere and everywhere at once. The villagers squinted, their breath catching in their throats as the light grew brighter, casting long shadows across the stone walls. Some swore they heard a sound, like the faintest echo of laughter, high and clear, as though carried on a distant breeze. Others claimed they felt a warmth, a gentle touch that seemed to soothe the raw edges of their grief. The mayor let out a low, mournful whinny, a sound that resonated deep within the hearts of those who heard it. It was a cry of loss, of longing, but also of something more, an unyielding determination, a refusal to let go. Solace's head dipped lower, her muzzle brushing against the linen once more, as though trying to wake Lena from her eternal slumber. The glow around her seemed to pulse in response, filling the room with an energy that no one could explain. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the light faded. The warmth ebbed away, leaving only the chill of the chapel and the soft flicker of candlelight. Solace stepped down from the coffin, her movements slow and deliberate, as though she understood the gravity of what she had done. She turned toward the congregation, her dark eyes sweeping over the villagers as if searching for something or someone. No one spoke. No one moved. The priest finally found his voice, though it trembled as he spoke. "Perhaps," he said, his words barely audible, "this is not the end of Lena's story." Solace stood there for a moment longer, her head held high, her presence both commanding and comforting. Then, with a slow, deliberate turn, she walked back down the aisle, her hooves echoing against the stone floor. The villagers watched in stunned silence as she disappeared through the chapel doors, leaving behind an air of wonder and unease. The chapel, once heavy with grief, now felt charged with something else. Hope, mystery, and the lingering sense that Lena's spirit was not as far away as they had believed. The days following the funeral were marked by an unsettling quiet that hung over the village like a fog. No one spoke openly of what had transpired in the chapel, yet the event lingered in everyone's minds. Conversations in the marketplace were hushed, and children, usually prone to running through the streets, played silently. The sight of Solace standing at the edge of the meadow, her ears twitching toward the distant woods, was enough to make anyone uneasy. There was a growing sense that something had been left unfinished, as if Lena's passing had unsettled not just the villagers, but the very land itself. It was on the third morning that the mare's behavior took another peculiar turn. Solace had been grazing by the pasture when she suddenly lifted her head. Her ears pricked forward. Without warning, she broke into a gallop, her hooves pounding against the earth as she raced toward the forest. Villagers who witnessed the scene called out in alarm, but no one dared follow. Solace disappeared into the shadow of the trees, her black coat blending with the darkness. She did not return that night. By the following morning, curiosity had overcome fear, and a small group of villagers decided to search for the mare. Among them was Etta, Lena's closest friend, a sharp-eyed girl with a determined set to her jaw. She had been unusually quiet since the funeral, her grief taking the form of a restless energy that now compelled her to act. Alongside her were Willem, the village blacksmith, and Marta, an elderly woman known for her knowledge of the forest's secrets. They entered the woods armed with lanterns and an unspoken determination to uncover whatever it was Solace seemed to be chasing. The forest was eerily quiet, its usual chorus of birds and rustling leaves replaced by an oppressive stillness. As the group ventured deeper, the air grew colder, and the trees seemed to press closer together, their gnarled branches forming a canopy that blocked out the sun. Etta clutched her lantern tightly, her eyes scanning the undergrowth for any sign of the mare. It wasn't long before they found her. Solace stood in a small clearing, her head lowered as she sniffed the base of a towering oak tree. The sight of the tree sent a shiver through the group. It was unmistakable. This was the oak Lena had often spoken of, the one she had claimed was a place of power and mystery. Its massive trunk was scarred with deep grooves, and its roots twisted across the ground like the fingers of a buried giant. The air around it felt charged, as though the tree itself were alive and watching. "What is she doing?" Willem asked, his voice a whisper. Etta didn't answer. She stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the tree. Solace looked up at her, then back at the base of the trunk, pawing at the ground as if urging Etta to follow her lead. Taking a deep breath, Etta knelt and began to clear away the dirt and leaves at the spot where the mare had been digging. The others watched in tense silence, their lanterns casting flickering shadows across the clearing. After a few minutes of digging, Etta's hands brushed against something solid. She paused, her heart pounding, and carefully unearthed what appeared to be a small wooden box. The box was old, its surface weathered and cracked, but it was still intact. Etta glanced at the others before opening it. Inside, she found a bundle of papers tied together with a piece of faded ribbon. The pages were yellowed with age, but Lena's unmistakable handwriting covered them. "It's her journal," Etta said, her voice trembling. She held the pages as though they might crumble in her hands. The group gathered around, their faces pale in the lantern light. Etta read aloud, her voice steady despite the emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. The journal entries painted a picture of Lena's final days. Her visits to the oak tree, her growing unease, and the secret she had uncovered. She wrote of whispers in the village, of overheard conversations that hinted at a betrayal involving her family. There was mention of an argument, of someone warning her to keep quiet. But most chillingly, Lena described feeling watched, as though something or someone was always just out of sight. She knew something, Marta said, her voice barely audible. Something that got her killed. Etta nodded, her jaw tightening. "And she left us for us to find." She knew Solace would lead us here. As they continued reading, the entries took on an almost frantic tone. Lena wrote of dreams in which the oak tree called to her, its roots reaching out like arms to pull her into the earth. She described a sense of foreboding, of an impending danger she couldn't escape. The final entry was dated the day before her death. It read, "The truth is heavy, but I can't carry it alone. If something happens to me, Solace will know what to do." The group sat in silence, the weight of Lena's words pressing down on them. Etta clenched her fists, her grief giving way to a fierce determination. We have to find out what she meant. This isn't over. Over the next few days, the villagers began piecing together fragments of the truth. Solace, as if understanding the importance of her role, continued to lead them to places Lena had frequented. At the meadow, they found a small stash of trinkets Lena had hidden. A broken locket, a letter written in a trembling hand, and a crude map that seemed to mark the location of the oak tree. Each discovery brought them closer to understanding what had happened, but it also deepened the mystery. The most significant breakthrough came when Marta, drawing on her knowledge of local lore, explained the legend of the oak tree. According to the stories, the tree was a place of reckoning, where the spirits of the wrong could seek justice. It was said that animals, being closer to the spiritual world, often acted as messengers or guardians for those who sought the tree's power. The villagers listened with a mixture of awe and fear, their suspicions about Lena's connection to the supernatural growing stronger. As the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, a clearer picture began to emerge. Lena had discovered something, an act of betrayal that threatened to tear apart the fragile harmony of the village. Someone had silenced her to protect their secret, and the oak tree had become both her refuge and her final resting place. Solace, bound to Lena by a bond that transcended life and death, was now carrying out her final wish, to bring the truth to light. The investigation reached its climax one stormy evening when Etta, unable to shake the feeling that they were missing something vital, returned to the oak tree alone. Solace was already there, waiting in the clearing with an air of quiet urgency. Together, they unearthed a small, rusted metal box buried at the base of the tree. Inside was the evidence Lena had gathered, proof of the betrayal, written in a hand that could only belong to one of the village elders. Etta's breath caught as she realized the implications. The truth was undeniable, and it would shatter the village if revealed. But as she looked into Solace's dark, knowing eyes, she felt a surge of resolve. Lena had risked everything to uncover the secret. It was up to Etta to ensure that her voice was finally heard. The storm raged as Etta trudged back to the village, her heart pounding with the weight of the truth she carried. The rusted metal box in her hands felt impossibly heavy, as though it contained not just evidence, but the gravity of Lena's unfinished story. Solace followed close behind, her hooves splashing through puddles as lightning illuminated the path ahead. The mare's presence was a comfort, a reminder that Etta was not alone in this. Lena's spirit seemed to hover between them, urging her forward. The villagers were gathered in the town square, drawn by the storm and an undercurrent of unease that had spread since Lena's funeral. They huddled under awnings and near the warmth of the inn's hearth, their murmurs barely audible over the howling wind. When Etta appeared, drenched and determined, clutching the metal box, the crowd fell silent. Even the storm seemed to pause as all eyes turned to her. "I've found the truth," she said, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. Lena didn't die by accident. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by a tense silence. The village elder, a stooped man named Corwin, stepped forward, his face etched with skepticism. "What are you saying, girl?" he demanded. "This is a dangerous claim." Etta met his gaze with unwavering resolve. "I'm saying that Lena was silenced because she discovered something someone didn't want her to know." She held up the box. "And I have the proof." Corwin's expression faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered, straightening his hunched frame. "This is nonsense," he said, though his voice lacked its usual authority. "You're letting your grief cloud your judgment." Etta ignored him and opened the box, pulling out its contents. letters, receipts, and notes scribbled in a hand that was all too familiar to the villagers. The documents detailed a conspiracy involving land deals and stolen funds, secrets that would ruin the reputations of some of the most respected members of the village council. But it was the final letter that sent a ripple of shock through the crowd. It was a hastily written warning addressed to Lena, urging her to stop digging into matters that didn't concern her. It was signed with Corwin's name. The elder's face drained of color as the villagers turned toward him, their eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and anger. This proves nothing," he stammered. "Anyone could have written that. It's just paper." Etta stepped forward, her voice rising above the storm. "It's not just paper. It's the reason Lena is dead." She knew the truth, and she wasn't afraid to stand up for what was right. And someone, she paused, letting her gaze sweep over the council members. Someone couldn't let her expose it. A murmur spread through the crowd as accusations flew and tempers flared. Corwin tried to speak, but his words were drowned out by the rising tide of anger and betrayal. The villagers demanded answers, their voices echoing against the stone walls of the square. Then, amidst the chaos, Solace stepped forward. The mayor's presence silenced the crowd as she walked to Etta's side, her dark eyes fixed on Corwin. It was as if she could see into his soul, her gaze unrelenting and full of quiet judgment. Corwin took a step back, his hands trembling. The villagers watched, their anger now mixed with awe, as Solace moved closer to him, her posture calm but purposeful. "You knew," Etta said, her voice cutting through the silence. "You knew Lena wouldn't back down, and you made sure she couldn't speak." Corwin began, but his voice broke. He looked around, searching for support, but found only the accusing eyes of his neighbors. Finally, he crumpled, sinking to his knees. "I didn't mean for it to happen," he said, his voice barely audible. "I just wanted to scare her. She wasn't supposed to." He stopped, burying his face in his hands. The crowd erupted in outrage, their cries of betrayal shaking the square. Corwin's confession was damning, but it wasn't enough to ease the pain of Lena's loss. Etta stepped forward, her hand resting lightly on Solace's neck. "This isn't just about Corwin," she said, her voice firm but steady. "It's about all of us. We let this happen because we ignored the signs, because we didn't listen to Lena when she tried to warn us. We have to be better than this." Her words hung in the air, heavy with truth. The villagers looked at each other, their anger giving way to shame. They had failed Lena, not just in life but in death, and now they had to find a way to make it right. The storm began to abate, the wind softening to a gentle breeze as the rain tapered off. The villagers decided, under Etta's guidance, to honor Lena by making amends for the wrongs that had been done. Corwin and the other council members implicated in the conspiracy were stripped of their positions, their ill-gotten gains redistributed to those they had wronged. The oak tree, once a place of fear and mystery, became a site of reflection and remembrance. The villagers planted wildflowers around its base, creating a living memorial to Lena's courage and spirit. In the days that followed, Solace's restlessness faded. She returned to the meadow, her movements calm and deliberate, as though a great weight had been lifted. The villagers often saw her standing beneath the oak tree, her head raised as if listening to something only she could hear. Some said she was communing with Lena's spirit, while others believed she was simply at peace, her purpose fulfilled. Etta visited the tree often, her heart heavy, but her resolve unshaken. She knew Lena's story was one of tragedy, but it was also one of strength, of standing up for what was right even when the odds were against her. Solace had been more than a companion. She had been a guide, a bridge between worlds, ensuring that Lena's voice was not silenced forever. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the meadow in golden light, Etta stood beneath the oak tree with Solace by her side. The mare nudged her gently, and Etta smiled, a single tear sliding down her cheek. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "for everything." As she turned to leave, she felt a warm breeze brush against her face, carrying with it the faintest echo of laughter. She paused, her heart swelling with a mixture of sorrow and hope. Lena was gone, but her spirit lived on. In the oak tree, in the wildflowers, and in the bond that had brought the truth to light. And as Etta walked away, Solace remained by the tree, her dark silhouette blending with the shadows. She stood watch, a sentinel of the past and a guardian of the future, ensuring that Lena's story would never be forgotten. The storm clouds had passed, leaving the village awash in an eerie stillness. The morning after Corwin's confession, the villagers gathered again, this time beneath the towering oak tree. The meadow around it was vibrant, its wildflowers swaying gently in the cool breeze. The air carried a sense of renewal, though it was tinged with sorrow. Lena's voice still seemed to linger, carried in the rustle of leaves and the faint hum of bees. Etta stood at the base of the tree, her hands gripping the rusted box that had unveiled the truth. Solace stood by her side, her black coat glistening in the sunlight. The mare's presence had become a symbol of Lena's spirit, her unwavering loyalty a testament to their unbreakable bond. The villagers had come not just to mourn, but to seek a way forward, to make amends for the failings that had led to Lena's death. The village elders, save for Corwin, who had retreated into isolation, stood solemnly among the crowd. Marta, the wise woman who had guided the search for answers, stepped forward. Her voice, though old, was steady as she addressed the crowd. "We cannot undo what has been done," she said, her gaze sweeping over the villagers. "But we can choose to honor Lena's memory by ensuring the truth is never silenced again." The crowd murmured in agreement. A makeshift platform had been erected beneath the oak tree, and Etta climbed onto it, the rusted box still in her hands. She hesitated for a moment, the weight of responsibility pressing on her. But Solace's steady gaze gave her the courage to speak. "Lena was more than a friend to me," she began, her voice firm despite the emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. "She was brave, curious, and unafraid to speak up when something wasn't right. She believed in justice, even when it cost her everything. We owe it to her to learn from this, to change the way we live and treat each other." Etta opened the box and held up the letters, the receipts, and the map Lena had drawn. "These are more than just pieces of paper," she said. "They're reminders of the harm caused when we prioritize power and greed over honesty and kindness. They show us what Lena was willing to fight for and what she died for." The villagers stood in silence, many of them wiping away tears. Etta's words struck a chord, igniting a collective determination to ensure Lena's sacrifice was not in vain. They knew change would not come easily, but it had to begin somewhere. One by one, villagers stepped forward to share their own confessions, small lies told, truths withheld, moments when they had chosen self-preservation over doing what was right. The confessions were not meant to shame but to cleanse, to start the process of healing and rebuilding trust. By the end of the day, a sense of unity had begun to emerge, fragile but real. As the sun began to set, casting golden light over the meadow, the villagers turned their attention to the oak tree. It had been the site of Lena's final moments, but it had also been her sanctuary, a place where she found courage and clarity. Together, they decided to create a memorial that would honor her spirit and serve as a reminder of the importance of truth and justice. Under Marta's guidance, the villagers planted a ring of wildflowers around the tree, choosing varieties Lena had loved. They placed a rusted box at the tree's base, burying it beneath the roots as a symbol of the truth Lena had uncovered. A carved stone was placed nearby, bearing her name and a simple inscription. Her voice brought light to the shadows. Etta knelt by the tree, her hand resting on the rough bark. She closed her eyes, letting the moment wash over her. She thought of Lena's laughter, her determination, and the way she had faced the world with unwavering courage. "You were right," she whispered. "The truth is heavy, but it's worth carrying." When she stood, Solace nuzzled her shoulder, a quiet gesture of comfort. The mare had been a constant through it all, a bridge between worlds, ensuring Lena's story was not forgotten. Etta knew that Solace's journey was far from over, even if Lena's part in it had come to an end. As the villagers began to disperse, the elders approached Etta. Marta spoke first, her voice filled with quiet admiration. "You've done more than uncover the truth," she said. "You've reminded us of what it means to stand together, to face our fears instead of hiding from them." Etta nodded, though her heart still ached with the weight of loss. "Lena showed me how," she said simply. In the days that followed, the village began to change. The council was restructured, its members chosen based on integrity rather than status. The oak tree became a gathering place, not just for mourning but for celebrating life and the lessons Lena had taught them. The villagers planted new trees in the meadow, each one a symbol of renewal and hope. Solace, too, seemed to find peace. The mare often lingered near the oak tree, her posture calm and her movements unhurried. Villagers would see her grazing in the meadow or standing beneath the tree, her presence a reminder of the bond that had transcended life and death. Some said she was waiting for Lena's spirit to return, while others believed she had become a guardian of the tree and its legacy. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the meadow in hues of orange and gold, Etta returned to the tree. She brought a small bouquet of wildflowers, which she laid at its base. Solace stood nearby, her dark coat glowing in the fading light. "You kept your promise," Etta said softly, her voice carrying a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. "You made sure we found the truth." Solace turned her head, her dark eyes meeting Etta's. In that moment, Etta felt a sense of completion, as though Lena's spirit had been watching over them all along, guiding them toward this moment of clarity and renewal. As night fell, the village settled into a peaceful quiet. The meadow bathed in the silver glow of the moon. The oak tree stood tall and unyielding, its roots entwined with the truth Lena had uncovered. Solace lingered for a while longer before walking back toward the village, her steps light and purposeful. She had done her part, and the world, for now, was at peace. The village had changed. In the weeks following the revelations and Lena's memorial, an air of quiet determination replaced the grief and chaos. The villagers, once hesitant to confront the darker truths in their midst, had begun to embrace the lessons Lena left behind. The oak tree stood as both a reminder and a symbol of their resilience, its roots now entwined with the collective memory of a girl who refused to let the truth be buried. Etta visited the tree often, always accompanied by Solace. The mare had become a constant presence in the meadow, her dark silhouette a comforting sight against the backdrop of wildflowers. For Etta, these visits were a chance to reflect, to feel Lena's spirit in the rustling leaves and the sunlight filtering through the branches. She brought flowers, small tokens, and sometimes her journal, where she wrote about the changes she saw in the village and in herself. The council had been reshaped, its new members chosen with care to represent the values Lena had fought for. Marta, whose wisdom had guided them through the darkest days, was elected as the new head. Under her leadership, the village held weekly gatherings at the oak tree to discuss issues openly, ensuring that secrets and silences would no longer fester. Etta often spoke at these gatherings, her voice steady and clear as she recounted Lena's bravery and the importance of carrying her legacy forward. One such gathering marked the first anniversary of Lena's death. The villagers surrounded the oak tree, their faces solemn but no longer weighed down by the same heavy grief. Instead, there was a sense of gratitude and reverence for what Lena had given them. Not just the truth, but a chance to rebuild their community on a foundation of honesty and trust. They lit candles, their flickering flames illuminating the carved stone at the tree's base. Etta stood beside it, her hands clasped as she spoke. "Lena taught us to listen," she said, her voice carrying across the meadow, "to pay attention to the things we might otherwise ignore, whether it's the voice of a friend, the wisdom of an elder, or the silence of someone who's been wronged." She believed in a better village, and it's up to us to live up to that belief. The crowd nodded in agreement, their faces lit with quiet determination. Solace stood nearby, her presence a silent but powerful reminder of the bond that had made all of this possible. The mare seemed to understand the significance of the moment, her posture calm and steady, as though she were standing guard over Lena's memory. After the gathering, Etta lingered by the tree, her fingers tracing the carved inscription on the stone. She felt a deep sense of connection to Lena in that moment, as if her friend were standing beside her, watching the village move forward. Solace nuzzled her shoulder gently, and Etta smiled. "We're doing our best," she whispered. "I hope you're proud." The seasons turned, and life in the village continued, though it was forever changed. The oak tree became a place not just of remembrance but of celebration. Weddings, births, and other milestones were marked beneath its branches, the villagers finding joy in the shade of what had once been a source of fear. The meadow bloomed with wildflowers, their colors vibrant and untamed, a living testament to Lena's spirit. Solace's role in the village shifted as well, though she remained Etta's constant companion. The mare began to visit the oak tree less frequently. Instead, she wandered the fields and paths Lena had loved, her presence a quiet reassurance to those who crossed her path. Villagers often spoke of feeling a sense of calm and clarity when they encountered her, as though she carried a piece of Lena's wisdom with her. Etta, too, found herself changing. She had grown stronger, more confident, her grief tempered by a sense of purpose. She took on more responsibilities in the village, becoming a voice of reason and a bridge between generations. Her bond with Solace deepened, the mare becoming not just a companion, but a symbol of the lessons they had both learned through Lena's loss. One late autumn afternoon, as the leaves turned gold and the air grew crisp, Etta found herself at the oak tree once again. The meadow was quiet, the wildflowers fading as the season shifted. She knelt by the stone, her fingers brushing away a few fallen leaves. Solace stood a short distance away, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I miss you," Etta said softly, her words carried by the breeze. "But I feel you everywhere, in the wind, in the flowers, in this tree. You're still here." As she spoke, a sudden gust of wind swept through the meadow, rustling the leaves and sending a cascade of golden petals into the air. Etta smiled, her heart swelling with a mixture of sorrow and joy. It felt like an answer, a quiet reassurance that Lena's spirit truly lingered in the places she had loved. That night, as the village settled into its quiet rhythm, Etta sat by the fire with Marta and a few others, recounting stories of Lena's adventures. They laughed and cried, their words weaving a tapestry of memory that kept Lena's presence alive. Solace lay nearby, her ears flicking as though she were listening to every word. As the fire crackled and the evening deepened, Etta felt a profound sense of peace. Lena's story was not just one of loss, but of resilience, of the unbreakable bonds between people, animals, and the land they called home. It was a story that would continue to shape the village for generations, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there was light to be found. When Etta finally drifted off to sleep that night, she dreamed of Lena. They were standing in the meadow, the oak tree towering behind them, its branches stretching toward the sky. Lena was smiling, her auburn hair catching the sunlight, and in her eyes was a warmth that filled Etta's heart. "You did it," Lena said, her voice soft but steady. "You made them see." Etta reached out, but before she could touch her friend, Lena stepped back, her form fading into the golden light of the meadow. Etta woke with tears in her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of gratitude, of love, and of a quiet certainty that Lena would always be with her. The days turned to weeks, the weeks to months, and the village continued to grow and thrive. The oak tree remained at its heart, a silent witness to the lives that unfolded around it. And though Solace's visits became less frequent with time, her presence was never forgotten. The villagers spoke of her with reverence, their voices tinged with wonder at the bond she had shared with Lena and the role she had played in uncovering the truth. Etta grew older, her life rich with the friendships and connections she had built. But no matter how many years passed, she always found her way back to the oak tree, where the wildflowers bloomed and the wind carried whispers of the past. It was a place of endings and beginnings, of loss and renewal, of a girl who had refused to let her voice be silenced, and a mare who had ensured it was heard. And in the quiet moments beneath its branches, Etta would close her eyes and listen, feeling the warmth of Lena's laughter in the breeze and the steady, grounding presence of Solace by her side. As the seasons turned and the years passed, the oak tree stood steadfast in the heart of the meadow, growing taller and broader, its roots reaching deeper into the earth. The villagers' relationship with the tree transformed. Where once it had been a place of unease and whispered fears, it became a gathering spot for hope, reflection, and storytelling. The wildflowers planted around its base flourished, their vibrant colors changing with the seasons, painting the meadow in hues that seemed to echo Lena's fiery spirit. The annual commemoration of Lena's life had evolved into a vibrant festival. On the anniversary of her death, the villagers would adorn the tree with ribbons and garlands, their colors reflecting Lena's favorite shades of the meadow. Families would bring picnics, children would chase each other through the grass, and elders would sit in the shade of the tree, sharing stories about Lena and Solace with anyone who would listen. Etta played a key role in this transformation, but she wasn't alone. Others in the village began to step forward, drawn by the courage Lena had shown in her short life. Among them was Eric, the son of a farmer, who had been a child when Lena passed, but was now a young man with a passion for justice. Inspired by the story of the oak tree, Eric took it upon himself to document the oral histories of the village, capturing the tales of Lena and Solace so they would never fade with time. Eric's work sparked a broader movement. Others began to come forward with stories of their own, accounts of struggles and triumphs, of secrets revealed and burdens lifted. The oak tree became a repository for these stories, a living archive of the village's collective memory. Beneath its branches, villagers would leave small tokens, handwritten notes, carved wooden figures, and delicate embroidery, each item carrying its own story of hope and resilience. One summer, Eric approached Etta with an idea. "We should build something," he said, his voice filled with quiet determination. "Something permanent to honor Lena and everything she stood for." Etta smiled at him, her heart swelling with pride. "What did you have in mind?" "A library," he said. "A place where we can keep all these stories. Not just Lena's, but everyone's, so that no one will ever forget." The idea took root quickly, spreading through the village like wildfire. Everyone wanted to contribute, from the blacksmith offering to forge hinges for the doors to the carpenter who promised to build the shelves. The project brought the villagers together in a way that hadn't been seen in decades, uniting them in a shared purpose. Even those who had once clung to their secrets found themselves opening up, eager to add their voices to the growing collection. The library was built at the edge of the meadow, its design simple but elegant. Its walls were made of stone gathered from the surrounding hills, and its roof was thatched with reeds from the nearby river. A single oak tree sapling was planted at its entrance, a nod to the great tree that had inspired it. Inside, the shelves were lined with books, scrolls, and journals, each one a testament to the lives and stories of the villagers. When the library was completed, the entire village gathered for its opening. Etta, now in her twilight years, was asked to cut the ribbon. As she stood before the crowd, her hands trembling slightly with age, she looked out at the faces of her neighbors. She saw hope, determination, and a sense of unity that filled her with joy. "This library is more than just a building," she said, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "It's a promise that we will never forget the lessons we've learned, the truths we've uncovered, and the bonds that hold us together." The crowd erupted into cheers as the ribbon fell, and the villagers poured into the library, eager to explore its shelves. Eric beamed with pride as he showed children where their parents' and grandparents' stories were stored. Etta lingered at the entrance, watching the scene unfold with a smile. Over time, the library became a hub of learning and creativity. Scholars from neighboring villages came to study the collection, drawn by the unique blend of history, folklore, and personal accounts that filled its shelves. Artists and writers found inspiration in the stories preserved there, creating paintings, songs, and poems that celebrated the village and its people. The oak tree continued to play a central role in the village's life. New rituals emerged around it, such as planting a sapling for every child born in the community and tying ribbons around its trunk to mark milestones and achievements. The meadow became a place of pilgrimage, attracting visitors from far and wide who had heard whispers of Lena's story and the transformative power of the oak tree. One day, a traveler arrived in the village, drawn by the stories he had heard of the library and the oak tree. He was a historian, an older man with a kind face and a deep love for uncovering hidden truths. He introduced himself to Etta, who welcomed him warmly and offered to guide him through the library. As they walked through the rows of shelves, the historian listened intently to Etta's account of the events that had led to the library's creation. He was particularly fascinated by the role Solace had played in uncovering the truth. "It's rare to hear of such a bond," he said, "a connection between a human and an animal that transcends life and death." Etta nodded, her gaze distant as she remembered Solace. "She was more than a horse," she said softly. "She was a guardian, a bridge between Lena's world and ours." The historian spent weeks in the village, recording interviews and studying the library's contents. When he finally left, he promised to share Lena's story far and wide, ensuring that her courage and Solace's loyalty would inspire others beyond the village. As time passed, the library became a place where the past and present converged. Children who grew up hearing Lena's story added their own chapters, contributing their voices to the ever-growing collection. The oak tree remained a symbol of strength and resilience, its branches stretching toward the sky as its roots held firm in the earth. Etta lived long enough to see the library flourish and the village thrive. On her final visit to the oak tree, she sat beneath its branches, her hands resting on the carved stone that bore Lena's name. She felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that Lena's legacy had not only endured but had grown into something far greater than she could have imagined. In the years that followed, the oak tree and the library became intertwined in the hearts of the villagers. They were reminders of the power of truth, the importance of community, and the bonds that connect us all. And though Etta and Solace had both passed into memory, their stories lived on, carried forward by the whispers of the wind and the rustling of leaves. The years rolled by, and the village continued to evolve, shaped by the legacy of Lena and the truth she had brought to light. The oak tree stood at the heart of their lives, its roots now intertwined with the stories of the villagers who came and went. Generations passed, and though Lena's name faded from everyday conversation, the essence of her courage remained etched into the fabric of the community. Etta grew older, her auburn hair streaked with silver as the seasons changed around her. She had become a respected figure in the village, sought after for advice and guidance, much as Marta had been in her time. The weekly gatherings at the oak tree had become a tradition, evolving from somber reflections into lively celebrations of life and unity. Etta often spoke at these gatherings, her voice carrying wisdom earned through years of trials and triumphs. Solace, the ever-faithful mare, had remained a steadfast presence for many years, though her visits to the oak tree became less frequent as time wore on. By the time Etta had entered her later years, Solace had gone, her absence bittersweet but peaceful. The villagers believed the mare had chosen her own time to leave, returning to the quiet corners of the forest where she and Lena had once roamed. It was said that her spirit lingered near the oak tree, watching over the meadow with the same protective grace she had shown in life. Etta often thought of Solace, especially on quiet evenings when the stars scattered across the sky like silver dust. She felt the mare's presence in the stillness of the air, in the rustle of leaves, and in the quiet moments when her heart swelled with memories of Lena. The loss was profound but gentle, like the tide retreating from the shore, leaving behind only the gift it had brought. One autumn afternoon, as golden leaves carpeted the ground and the air carried a crisp chill, Etta found herself at the oak tree once again. The meadow was alive with color, the wildflowers vibrant despite the cooling weather. She knelt by the carved stone at the tree's base, tracing the inscription with her fingertips, Her voice brought light to the shadows. The words, etched so many years ago, still held their power. They reminded Etta of Lena's bravery, her determination, and the bond she had shared with Solace. It was a legacy that continued to shape the village, even as time moved forward. As she sat beneath the tree, a group of children approached, their laughter ringing through the meadow. They carried small bouquets of wildflowers, their faces bright with curiosity. One of them, a freckled boy with a gap-toothed grin, stepped forward. "Miss Etta," he said, his voice filled with wonder, "tell us about Lena again." Etta smiled, her heart warming at their eagerness. She motioned for them to sit, and they gathered around her in a circle, their eyes wide with anticipation. She began to speak, weaving the tale of Lena and Solace, of the secrets uncovered and the courage it took to face them. Her words painted vivid pictures, bringing the past to life for a new generation. The children listened intently, their expressions shifting from awe to sadness to joy as the story unfolded. When she finished, the boy spoke again. "Do you think Lena and Solace are still together? Like, up there?" He pointed toward the sky, his finger tracing the outline of the clouds. Etta's gaze followed his, her eyes soft with memory. "I believe they are," she said gently. "I think they're watching over us together, just like they always were. And I think they're proud of what this village has become." The children nodded solemnly, their young minds absorbing the weight of her words. They placed their bouquets at the base of the tree, adding their own small tributes to the ever-growing memorial. One by one, they ran off, their laughter echoing through the meadow as they chased each other through the tall grass. Etta remained under the oak tree for a while longer, her thoughts drifting between the past and the present. She felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that Lena's story would continue to inspire those who came after her. The oak tree, with its roots deeply embedded in the earth and its branches stretching toward the sky, was a perfect symbol of Lena's enduring legacy. As twilight descended over the village, Etta rose to her feet, brushing off her skirt. She placed her hand on the trunk of the oak tree, her touch lingering for a moment. "Thank you," she whispered, her words carried away by the breeze. Years later, long after Etta herself had passed on, the village continued to thrive. The oak tree became a landmark, its history passed down through generations. Children grew up hearing tales of Lena and Solace, their imagination sparked by the bond between a girl and her horse, and the courage it took to uncover the truth. The meadow became a place of pilgrimage for travelers who had heard whispers of the story, drawn by the allure of the oak tree and the legacy it represented. The villagers planted more trees in the meadow, creating a living testament to the values Lena had championed. Each tree carried a plaque with a simple inscription: "Speak the truth. Stand for justice." The grove became a sanctuary, a place where people could reflect, heal, and find inspiration. And though Solace and Lena had long since departed from the physical world, their presence remained. Visitors to the grove often spoke of a sense of peace that washed over them as they stood beneath the trees, as though unseen eyes watched over them with quiet approval. Some claimed to hear the faint echo of laughter in the wind, while others swore they caught glimpses of a sleek black mare in the distance, her silhouette blending with the shadows. In the end, Lena's story became more than just a tale of loss and redemption. It became a reminder of the strength it takes to speak the truth, the courage it takes to face injustice, and the bonds that transcend time and space. Her voice, carried on the whispers of the wind and the rustling of leaves, continued to inspire, ensuring that the light she brought to the shadows would never fade.